Hey everybody, I'm Adam, and this is Think Club. I have a great talk today with Glenn Scrivener. He's a Church of England minister. He runs a YouTube channel called Speak Life. I ended up on the YouTube channel, and we had a little back and forth in the comment section about objective morality, and I thought it would be interesting to have a discussion about that. So this conversation really covers the perspective of objective morality from my materialist atheist perspective and his from a Christian believer perspective. I have a small clip here that I'm going to play from the video that got this conversation started, just because I think it's interesting, and we also reference the video in the conversation. So here is a little snippet of the video.
When I say I don't think a culture should treat women as less valuable than men, how do I want that view to be heard? Am I expressing a moral ought or just an aesthetic preference? Great question. Totally legit question. Haidt struggles.
Why is it that when it comes to moral questions, you think they're more like reason and less like art?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I don't know that everyone should have the same morality, and I know that they don't, and not everyone's going to agree with my morality versus someone else's. I think you can have good reasons for choosing different paths in that sense.
Well, then what's the heuristic by which you check? Some people, I think we both agree, some people have, bad things that they value, or misapplied priorities, or just actually value bad things. In the case of the Taliban structure of morality, where women are counted as less than human, is there something that they're missing that means that they're missing out on a fact that would tell them that's not true? Is that an arbitrary distinction, and you just don't share their beliefs, but there's not a reason they should share yours?
That women should be treated equally?
That's what I believe. That's what you believe. And
Right.
Some people don't believe that. What's the reason by which they should come to believe what we believe, rather than say, oh, people all have different ideas?
So I've included links to the video in the description below, and also links to the Speak Life channel. So I hope you enjoy the conversation, and as always, you can leave us your feedback in the comments below.
Hey, I'm Glenn Scrivener from Speak Life, and that's the name of our charity. And so we've got a YouTube channel that we put stuff on.
Now, your YouTube channel is a charity, you're saying?
So I work for a charity called Speak Life. So I'm a Church of England minister by day, and some of the things that the charity frees me up to do is produce video content. It's just part of the job.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, your YouTube channel is super tiny, and you have really great, slickly produced content. So I was curious. I figured, we actually got a little back and forth going, I think, in your comment section about objective morality. So.
Yeah. No, I was glad to chat that through with you. I think really we tend to specialize in seasonal videos, so we'll do a lot of Christmas stuff, a lot of Easter stuff. So as a Christian charity, we're just wanting to take advantage of, for instance, Halloween. We've got kind of a Halloween themed video that goes out, and so those tend to be our popular bits of video. But we're only just recently getting into the ongoing comment video stuff and the bread and butter of YouTube now.
Well, you had a response video to Haidt Meta. The video is called "Where Do You Get Your Moralities From?" that I was particularly interested in. And we're going to talk about that a bit. We're going to talk for about an hour, maybe a little bit more than an hour. But you had seen Peterson recently in Oxford. So let's talk about that a bit. I think you mentioned in email that you actually saw a cosmic skeptic there.
He was there. Alex O'Connor was there. Yeah. Taller than you might expect, and he had the look of you've got to feel for sort of minor celebrities, don't you? Because they've always got to walk through public spaces expecting for people to notice them, and then you've got to also have a face that looks like you don't care whether people notice you or not. And it was that kind of thing. But it was great to see him from a distance last night. And Peterson's on tour. He's doing a kind of a Europe thing at the moment with Dave Rubin opening up. And he looks tired, though. Peterson looks very, very tired. I think they're working him hard.
He's working himself hard, I think. I guess CAA probably sets up his gigs now that he's with CAA.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, as Dave Rubin was saying, every day there's a hit piece on him, so he's got to kind of deal with that during the day. And then at night he gives a new kind of a talk, speaks on one of the new, a different rule every night.
So what is your take on Jordan Peterson? You're a minister, so you're technically a believer, a person. I don't know if you know, but I'm technically an atheist. So I don't know if you watch much of my content, but I am one of those strange Peterson atheist fans.
No, absolutely. But, my favorite line from Jordan Peterson is always when he's asked what he believes is, what the hell do you know about what you think you believe? You are not transparent to yourself. Watch what I do. And then Peterson's always quoting Matthew chapter 7, by their fruits you shall know them. And then he says, I live as though God exists. And he's much less interested in the metaphysical question. I think that's actually quite a healthy thing. It's actually something that I reflect back on as a Christian, because I meet with people every week who say that they're Christians, but so much of the content of our belief that we say we believe, we don't actually believe. And if you just watch the way that we live, you'll notice that we don't exactly live up to turn the other cheek and love your enemies and forgive and all that kind of stuff. So I find Peterson's existentialism on that question really refreshing and really helpful. I kind of came across him, I guess, probably 18 months ago with the biblical lectures, and thought it was fantastic to see somebody treating the Bible as though it's written for human beings. Because I'm a preacher and I'm surrounded by other Christian preachers who tend to treat the Bible as though it's kind of this technical manual for helping Christians kind of tweak their Christian discipleship just a little bit. And just wonderful to see a clinical psychologist saying, no, actually, the Bible addresses people as people. And so I've learned loads from his biblical lectures. Don't always agree with his interpretations, but I just think it's fascinating to see somebody taking the Bible seriously and preaching it as though, I say preaching it, he kind of does preach it, speaking about it as though this is a wisdom that is for humanity. That, for him, it's this emergent thing that's from the ground up. And to some degree, my Christian faith believes that too. I think the Bible is also very much a human document and very much a human product. I also happen to think that God is involved, and I happen to think there's a top-down thing happening as well. But as Peterson treats it as a wholly bottom-up kind of document, I see him deriving huge wisdom from it. And I think the church has got lots to learn from him.
So you come at it very much from a believer's point of view, and I come at it very much from a non-believer's point of view. I actually got into Peterson. I don't know if you know the work of Jonathan Haidt, but I saw so I saw a lot of parallels between what Jordan Peterson was talking about and Jonathan Haidt's work. So one of the things that I thought was interesting about the video that brought me to your channel was there are answers to a lot of the questions that you're asking Haidt Mehta in the video Haidt Mehta was just unprepared to answer. He did a very poor job of representing the materialist perspective on that. What is the conflict between the materialist perspective and the religious perspective? Because sometimes I feel like this conflict is very minor and could easily be resolved.
Yeah, the video we did prior to the Haidt Mehta video that you saw actually mentions Jonathan Haidt quite a bit.
Oh, really? I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. So actually, the second video that you saw was kind of an afterthought, because in the debate that he had with Sean McDowell, Haidt Mehta was just answering a question about morality, and I just thought it was an interesting side issue. In the first video, what we covered was kind of the anthropology of certain kinds of atheism. Mm-hmm. And we go out of our way to say, look, not every kind of atheism shares this kind of anthropology. And I mentioned sort of Jonathan Haidt in that regard, that there does seem to be, with a certain brand of new atheist, a kind of this Enlightenment understanding that we are these rational individuals who kind of read the data completely neutrally. We just, scan things like a barcode scanner and just blip, 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 and in goes the data and we process it. Which I think
you don't buy that, do you?
No.
Okay.
No, and Christianity has never ought not to buy that.
Right. Christianity as a philosophy seems great to me because you're talking about how man is, is imperfect, and the idea behind Christ is that he is perfect and that we're striving to perfect ourselves, but we always fall short. So as a philosophy, I think Christianity is great.
Yeah. And I think there's so much overlap between Jonathan Haidt and what Christians have always been saying. And, every Christian I know, sort of in Christian leadership, says you've got to read The Righteous Mind. You've got to understand.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Oh, yeah. He's kind of a superstar among Christians of a certain sort of Augustinian bent. I don't know if that kind of.
Yeah, I actually just met Jonathan Haidt last week. Yeah. He is kind of a superstar. He definitely is.
Yeah, and so he kind of frames things Hume's way, but I think Hume himself was drawing on a lot of Christian tradition. He was obviously rejecting a lot of Christian tradition as well, but that the whole idea that moral intuitions come first and then rationalizations come later.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just Christianity 101. We are self-justifying fools. We are, as Augustine said, curved in on ourselves. Or Martin Luther in the Reformation, he said that we have a real bondage of the will, which is not that you can't do what you want to do. It's that you can only do what you want to do, and you can't really shift what you want to do. Your heart is like the elephant in Jonathan Haidt's analogy, and your brain just yabbers along like the rider. And Luther was saying that back in the Reformation. So another guy, sort of Archbishop Cranmer, who wrote the Book of Common Prayer. I'm an Anglican minister, so I use the Book of Common Prayer on a weekly basis. But he sort of summarized our anthropology, or rather someone summarized his anthropology as what the heart loves, the will chooses, and the mind justifies.
Interesting.
And there's a great sort of dialogue online with Jonathan Haidt speaking to some Christians in New York. There's a ministry called Mockingbird. And they bring him that sort of phrase from Cranmer's anthropology. And and they're just like two hearts beating together. I find it a profoundly Christian anthropology to say that we are not these rational individuals who calmly and neutrally assess the data and formulate our ideas. We are tribal, we are self-justifying, we employ motivated reasoning, confirmation bias, all that kind of stuff, I think, is there from page 1 of the Bible, really.
So Peterson and Haidt both have a very materialist view of morality. I mean, if you look at Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations theory, he's proposing a very mechanistic view of morality. And one of the things that I think the anti-theists get wrong at their own peril is there are answers to these questions from a very materialist perspective that they're just unwilling to accept. And I think, ironically, one of the reasons they're unwilling to accept it is that moral foundations theory really puts a lot of evidence behind the fact that Christianity is a time-tested evolutionary model for philosophy that's really adaptive, and their whole goal is to dispel Christianity with the idea that somehow this is going to make the world a more rational place, which I just think is kind of a fool's errand. So I think their moral blindness towards moral foundations theory, or Peterson talks about it in terms of personalities, I think really does them a disservice. But I'm curious what your take is on that materialist mechanistic view. And maybe we'll just get into it a little bit here, because I wrote down some of the questions from your video. I don't know if you know Hemant Mehta. Do you know Hemant Mehta's story? Yeah.
No.
So Hemant Mehta is actually this interesting personality in the anti-theist community, because he runs a blog that's a very popular blog. I think every atheist on the planet must read this blog, because he picks kind of picks out the next atheist YouTube celebrity. It's because he writes about them on his blog, and then their channel blows up. And then I call them career atheists, which is a little bit of a dig, but I don't understand. Like they are pitching a form of morality, whether or not they know it or not. And the parallels between actual religion are just uncanny. I mean, they all have Patreons. They're all making money. People are effectively tithing to them to produce
evangelists. Yeah.
Very much an evangelical type movement, evangelical atheism. So, but I mean, I got into atheism because I wanted to know. Well, I kind of fell into atheism. I mean, I just wanted to know more about the world, and I grew up a Christian, so the first place you always look, you're like, oh, wisdom, it's got to be here in the Bible. But when I didn't find what I was looking for, because I'm just a very systematic person, a very mechanistic person, then I looked elsewhere. But I never drank the Dawkins Kool-Aid that religion was like this blight on humanity, that religion was this mind virus that we needed to erase. I always kind of just like set that aside and said, okay, let's see the evidence on this one, Dawkins. Let's see the evidence. And Dawkins just never produced the evidence, but Haidt really did, and it produced the evidence the other way. So what is your take on, like, if I lay out a mechanism, like if I go ahead and answer all the questions that you posed to Haidt Meta, that Haidt Meta was woefully unable to answer, is that problematic for, I used the word, is that a problem for your faith? I don't feel like it is.
No, I don't think so. So, we make the joke in the video that when Haidt Meta is asked the question, where do you get your morals from? He only answers the question, do you have morals? And it's a bit like when somebody says, where do you get your trousers from? Yeah. And the other person says, I've got trousers.
Great point.
So I don't have a problem with atheists saying I have a morality. I really don't have a problem with them saying their morality is superior to the Christian morality. In some ways, that almost sort of goes to my point, which would be, if you say your morality is there, I say my morality is here, and if you say yours is above mine, what is it up here that adjudicates between these two moralities? And so I think there are then interesting conversations about are there transcendent moral values? And if you start to describe the ways in which you have grounded your morality in terms of care versus harm, or sanctity versus degradation, or any of the other moral foundations, I absolutely see that. I guess I then want to question, are you just describing your moral intuitions, or are you really giving me a foundation for them? That would be my question, I guess.
Well, the scientific foundation for morality, I think, goes back to this idea of why morality evolved. Morality evolved to turn individual humans into teams, and that team's success is very much a product of that moral system. One of the reasons why Christianity is the world champion religion right now, has the most members of any other faith, is because it solves an evolutionary problem better than any of these other faiths do. So if you evaluate it by that criteria, you're definitely evaluating it by a mechanistic criteria. And as far as I don't necessarily know, you say above, better, worse. In Peterson's worldview, that better, worse is adjudicated by what he would call the Darwinian framework. So the fact that Christianity has been through this evolutionary cycle and has survived shows that it is true enough, as he would say, that it is a high form. Well, we're talking in metaphors again. Jonathan Peugeot is going to give us a hard time. But the better, worse, I think, is more. What is? In an evolutionary. Do you believe in evolution? Or
Yeah, I don't doubt that evolution has happened on many levels.
Okay.
I don't think that natural selection can explain the whole thing. And I think that's the kind of the basic Christian answer is not to deny that natural selection and Darwinian evolution has happened on some level, but to deny that that is the entire explanation for
some fundamentalist some fundamentalist Christians in the U.S. do deny evolution. Like, we have young Earth creationists that don't even think the Earth is older than 6,000 years. So, but most Christians.
I've got friends who I've got a friend who works for Ken Ham, and yet he doesn't deny that natural selection happens, and he doesn't deny that there's a whole heap of selection pressure that has happened on our species. But so trying to be as Catholic with a small c as possible when I look at the Christian view on the matter, whether you are the 6,000 year or the 13.7 billion year, I think we all believe that natural selection happened, but we don't believe that it can explain the totality of our human experience.
Right. The grounding of the morality is an interesting question, because you brilliantly explained this in the video where you do the trousers thing, and Haidt Mehta, I'm not sure it ever really even answers like where his morality comes from. I don't think he's familiar with moral foundation theory. I don't think he knows that his morality is basically, if you observe him, you can see that his morality is mostly a liberal, progressive morality based on care harm, which is what Jonathan Haidt lays out in The Righteous Mind. He doesn't know this, and if you said to him, your moral intuitions are what's driving the ship, he would probably bristle at the idea of that. Most anti-theists do, but Haidt lays this out in The Righteous Mind, that the grounding in a deity is a good way to ground moral ethics, just because it has the force of, people are going to stay in line. You're more likely to stop cheaters, which is the evolutionary problem in putting people into these groups, is bringing cheaters and slackers into line. The idea of a god is a very good way to bring cheaters and slackers into line, but it's a very mechanistic way to do it.
Mm-hmm. So I guess one question would be, within the Darwinian frame, yes, you can say that perhaps Christianity has proved itself to be adaptive to the West, but then you would also have to say that Hinduism has proved itself to be equally adaptive to the Indian subcontinent, right?
Right.
And then what do you do at that stage? With the British Raj, there they are in India. There is the practice of sutti, which is the burning of widows. And it surely within the Darwinian frame, you have to say that the burning of widows on the funeral pyre with their husbands has proved itself to be adaptive to that, that culture. We in the West tend to think differently. What is it that makes us say, that does not make us say, well, each to their own? What is it that sort of, there was that famous case of the...
you could make the argument rationally. You very much could, because you could make a case, if you're looking at it from a group unifying perspective, the idea that burning a widow on the funeral pyre would foment, the idea that would foment conflict within the group seems like a pretty good case to be made. You're also limiting your resources by...
It happened for thousands of years up to that point.
Well, I think there are moralities that are adaptive, that there are better moralities. I think moralities are constantly competing, and they're competing in whether or not the group survives. The group that adopts any kind of moral framework either has a survival advantage against other groups or doesn't. So, and a lot of times, just evolutionarily speaking, groups can toss aside one morality and pick up another if they think that it's going to be more beneficial.
Yep. And so,
but what you bring up an interesting point, and I want to touch on it before it gets past us. Why is it so important to be able to say, like, in your video, you make a case for moral facts, like an objective type of morality. Why is it so important to say that this is beyond opinion, that this is something that is, I mean, because you're almost appealing to science when you say that this has to be an objective fact?
I don't think I want to make the pragmatic argument that we need to have a structure, we need to have a transcendent value so that we can sort ourselves out as cultures. I guess I more want to I want to notice that we have these intuitions in the same way that Jonathan Haidt wants to notice that we have these intuitions, and I think they do go beyond the struggle for survival. I think they do go beyond simple selection advantage in the struggle for survival.
How do they?
In that, so you say widow burning. In this culture you burn widows. In this culture you protect widows and look after them. It is just not our moral intuition to say, hey, each to their own, and let them get on with their thing and let us get on with our thing. We do seem to have this idea of an adjudicating transcendent value that would say that one is better than the other. And as I look around the world, there are things that I don't think fit easily into a purely materialistic frame. And I think morals is one of them. I think the fact that we have minds is another. The fact that we have aesthetics and music and beauty is another. The fact that we have logic and rationality is another. I just think that the kind of metaphysical furniture that there is in the universe is not best represented as basically material with these emergent properties coming out of just matter in motion. I think this multi, very textured universe that we live in is best accounted for by saying that there is a kind of reality called moral truth, and there's a kind of reality called materialistic science, and there's a kind of reality out there called aesthetics and beauty, and
there is some overlap between us. Like, you mentioned the aesthetic question in the video. Like, you're kind of making these two boxes. You're saying there is aesthetics on one side, and you're saying there is functionality on the other, right? Or objectivity, kind of a scientific framework.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, but there are vocations where the two overlap. I mean, there is like architecture, where architecture is both functional and beauty. And morality, I don't see why it can't be in both those realms at the same time. Because morality, one of the reasons why I enjoy having these conversations, and I think it's interesting, I watch a lot of content online where people are really, they're not really touching on morality. They're kind of emoting this. They're giving their own personal intuitions about morality. But if you think of morality very mechanistically, like, morality serves a purpose. It really does. It evolved to serve a purpose. It's not here just for some random reason. It evolved to turn individuals into groups, because groups have this massive survival advantage over individuals. Like, we've tamed this planet because of morality. So I mean, I understand what you're saying about how grounding your morality in a supernatural being is helpful. And I completely agree. And I think from a mechanistic point of view, the evidence bears that out. But I guess the question that I really have is why. I mean, I'm not a moral relativist. I'm not going to say that the burning the widow is okay. It's not okay. But there's rational reasons why it's not okay. And there's rational reasons why Christianity surpassed that, because we got rid of that practice it made our morality more evolutionarily successful. Like evolution is very much driven by reason, calculating reason, right?
I do wonder whether evolution might undermine reason, though, in terms of if my mind has evolved purely in order to survive, then it is not evolved so much to respond to truth as to win, as you know, and so
that's correct. Yes, truth is not important as far as survival and reproduction goes.
Yeah. So why does that not make you very suspicious of your mind and very suspicious of what you would call rationality if your mind has purely been evolved in order to win rather than in order to find the truth?
Well, the separation that I would make would be between perception, my personal perception, and actually what is going on in the physical world. In the physical world, I think mathematically we can calculate exactly what's happening with evolution. But my perception is obviously going to be tainted. Like this is a problem that I have with many of the anti-theists, because the anti-theists seem to be axiomatically, like they have a belief axiomatically that knowing factual reality will be better, will make better outcomes for society. And I keep saying citation needed. Like, where are you getting this from? Like, why do you think all the evidence shows that Christians are happier people, like they live longer lives, they tend to be more productive citizens, and just because we can't scientifically prove what they believe seems to be doing a hell of a bang up job for making them happy, healthy people. So,
yeah. But I do think there is. I mean, Alvin Plantinga, a Christian philosopher, has kind of framed this in its most potent way, that if our minds or brains have been evolved purely to respond to survival, if even rationality is in the service of winning rather than in the service of seeking truth, then just imagine the entire scope of evolutionary history that has produced your mind, my mind. Why would we trust that when we are reasoning that we are actually doing argumentation rather than just argumentativeness? There are those two theories about why do we interact, why do we rationalize with one another? Is it argumentation theory, where my goal is simply to seek after the truth and you're my conversation partner, and isn't it great that we can butt up against each other and maybe synthesis and antithesis and then thesis antithesis and synthesis in this argumentation way? I think you've got a lot of sociologists saying, if we're going to be truly Darwinian, surely it must be an argumentative theory, that actually we've evolved rationality and reasoning together, not in order to seek for truth, but in order to win.
Yeah, and I agree.
That saws off the branch on which we're sitting. If we're trying to reason even about something like evolution, that evolution has not actually delivered to us the brains that are capable of thinking it through.
So you make a claim about immaterial moral facts, and are there moral categories beyond preference? How do you conceptualize that? I think the universe is not just matter in motion, and I think that I don't think that should be the default understanding, as though everyone realizes that the universe is matter in motion, and then the Christian needs to come in and prove this extra thing called God or the supernatural or that sort of thing. I think what we're all doing is we're using minds, we're using reason, we're using logic and language and emotion and these moral intuitions and these aesthetic judgments and all these sorts of things in order to, and all those things is that those things are immaterial. And so I don't think it is obvious that the world is
a kind of a closed naturalistic system, and then the Christian has to prove supernaturalism. What I prefer to do is just notice the fact that we navigate this world using all sorts of immaterial values. One of them is sort of moral values. And what I notice is that, for instance, if you say Christians are sort of, the world champion religion in this, globally, historically in this moment, what I notice about Christianity is that it says that it's all about the sacrifice of the strongest for the survival of the weakest. That's kind of like, if you want to boil down the Christian, gospel, the good news at the heart of Christianity is that, Christ, the strongest, was sacrificed for we, the weakest, so that we might survive and that he might give of himself. That seems, totally to be an inversion, really, of the survival of the fittest and the sacrifice of the strongest.
Yeah, but this is one of the points that I'm constantly making about how this is the heart of Christianity. This is what it takes to make strong teams. This is the most important thing. I mean, I did a video recently where I showed a picture of an ant, and the ants will do the same kind of thing where they sacrifice themselves for the group all the time. And it's a very selfless act. So if you look at religion as trying to motivate that behavior in people, Christianity is the world champion of motivating that behavior in people. And that behavior is adaptive beyond belief. I mean, that is the most adaptive behavior. You can't get chimpanzees to sacrifice for one another. And that's why the chimpanzees are in the zoo and we're the ones building skyscrapers. Yeah.
Within the Darwinian frame, though, is it not true that the chimpanzee is as adaptive to its own environment as the beaver is to its environment, is as adaptive as the penguin is to its own environment, is as adaptive as bacteria to its own environment? That in a sense,
right,
there is no higher or lower. That we're all just we happen to have found an adaptive way of being in our environment,
right.
If that's true, then can you, from a Darwinian perspective, say that Christianity is better than Hinduism?
Do you want to be able to say that Christianity is better than Hinduism? Is that important?
Not from the religious fundamentalist sense.
I mean, I don't know much about Hinduism, so I feel bad like beating up on the Hindus out there.
But yeah, no. So the reason I bring up Hinduism in that instance is because we've just talked about the issue of widow burning.
Right.
So just in the moral sense of there is a moral conception in which actually looking after widows in Old Testament and New Testament is a really high value in the Bible. Burning widows is a practice within certainly Hinduism back in the day. Mm-hmm. It does seem to me that we want to we reach for a vocabulary that says this is better than that, but I don't think the Darwinian frame gives you that, because I think a chimp is as adaptive as a beaver is, just in their different environments. Why do we not use that kind of conceptual framework when it comes to morality?
It seems like one of the difficulties that you have is, without the concept of God as a moral authority, how do you marshal that authority? Which is something I'm very receptive to, because I mean the danger is always nihilism, and how you fight against, like, a creator God is a very adaptive way to fight against nihilism, even if that God is non-existent. So
maybe that is what I'm doing. I think from my perspective, what I'm trying to do is say there seems to be a kind of a moral reality out there that we respond to. Mm-hmm. In the same way, I would say that there is an aesthetic reality that we respond to, and there is a kind of a rational reality that we respond to, and there's a scientific reality that we empirically kind of try to respond to. And so I'm not even trying to say you need to have the dictator above that tells you, but I am trying to say,
don't call him a dictator. That sounds so bad.
Well, So, yeah, I don't think you need the authority. It's not so much that you need this supernatural authority figure to enforce a code on us. That's not the way that I'm arguing. The way I'm trying to argue is that I think there just are. We have these moral intuitions because they go deeper than just a Darwinian frame. It goes because at points it conflicts with a Darwinian frame. And yet we seem to have this intuition. And therefore, I think to simply to speak of these moral realities as basically emergent properties of something else over here is not to treat that sphere, to treat that moral realm according to its true nature.
You also mentioned, you made one other claim in the video. You talked about slavery building civilization. And there not being rational reasons to dispel slavery or to abolish slavery. The Christians abolished slavery. My reading of history is the Underground Railroad was run by Christians who wanted to abolish slavery. Like the ideas that, and this has some overlap with what Jordan Peterson is talking about the primacy of the individual, which is a Christian concept. I think it actually began with Martin Luther, the idea that we could understand God, that we didn't need to go through the church hierarchy. We could have a personal relationship with God. I think moved that idea of the primacy of the individual forward. There's
also Trinitarian theology going in the background from the sort of 3rd and 4th century as well. But sorry, yeah, keep going.
No, so the idea behind slavery, though, slavery, I mean, there's tons of scientific, rational, materialist reasons why slavery is not going to unlock the kind of economic potential which would be a huge evolutionary windfall for humanity. I mean, there's a reason why the West surged ahead of the rest of the world when we abolished slavery. Like you can force people to work under slavery, but you won't. They won't work very hard. They'll slack as much as they can. They'll break their tools. They'll rebel. Like humans make terrible slaves. So. Abolishing slavery freed all of this economic potential that, I mean, those are all rational reasons to get rid of slavery. So I think if you do make a evolutionary case, a rational case, a democratic case to end slavery, I think, and this case can be superimposed onto the widow example that you're giving too. It can be superimposed. I mean, I think in the video you give Hemant Mehta a hard time for not understanding why the men and women being equal is more advantageous than more traditional forms, like morally more traditional forms of division of labor. I think the jury is actually out on that purely from an evolutionary point of view, whether or not more traditional gender roles are better for society or less traditional gender roles.
Right.
So.
Right. And so then you've got a measurement problem. If you're going to be purely consequentialist about it, you've got the measurement problem of how do we know, how can we even make that judgment about society today, let alone if we change the structure of male-female relationships, or if we change the structure of, releasing the slaves, how on earth will we know what the economic, benefits and costs will be in 5 years' time, 50 years' time? And, we make the case in the video that it costs the British government something like £17.5 million back in the day, which was 40% of, the government's budget. It was a debt that Britain continued to pay up until 2015. Mm-hmm. So only 3 years ago did Britain stop paying for this, incredible shift that had never happened before. Basically Aristotle and Plato said that, does not nature teach you that human beings are living tools? It's very obvious. They thought it was very obvious just to look at human personality and just think, well, this guy is really good at ruling and this guy is really not good at ruling and he can't even rule himself. So wouldn't it be good if this guy ruled over that guy? And it had seemed totally natural pre-human civilization until literally yesterday. In if we're going to talk in Darwinian time frames,
Yeah,
we're going to talk
definitely.
like 5 minutes ago, we decided that slavery was a bad idea. Literally just 5 minutes ago, and maybe now we can look and see, oh, it's obvious that human beings aren't made to be slaves and all that kind of stuff. And at that point, I'm thinking, as a Christian, I'm thinking, we're meant to be free. We're meant to be part of we're the children of God, not the slaves of God. We're meant to be these liberated people who go out into the world. And so it now appears obvious to us that slavery is a bad idea, but it did cost. It did cost us hugely in order to get rid of it. And the only kind of worldview, the only kind of belief system, the only kind of metaphorical truth that had ever given the impetus to actually crash through that barrier was this weird thing that said, actually, there is a God who became a slave so that you can become free. There is this story that overturned it. So, I mean, that's suggestive to me that this is the kind of story that is actually in tune with the way the world works. And another thing on that issue, if it's a case, if you're saying, the Taliban, want to put women in bags, and we in the West want to, liberate women, or that kind of thing. If the only kind of element in your conversation is, what is the smooth running of society? Will society run more smoothly under the Taliban, or will it run more smoothly under a Western liberal, democratic system? I don't think that resonates with how we make moral judgments. I think we kind of make moral judgments as though, even if the Taliban were right, that's not right. Even if the Taliban system worked more smoothly, that's not right. Or even if slavery was more economically, viable, that's not right. It seems like the category of right and the category of smooth running society and just the survival value of the culture, they just seem to be apples and oranges. And I just think you lose something when you try and say that moral judgments are basically versions of survival value questions. I think they are apples and oranges, and that's why I'm keen to say that there's a moral realm that's distinct from that natural realm.
The impetus of your video was very much separating moral opinion, though, from a scientific fact, and you bringing the objective morality card into play are really the one. I mean, people tend to define objective differently. I mean, I define objective in the scientific sense, where objective means there is some agreed upon measurement. We can measure between the sun and the earth and agree upon a measurement. With morality, things are a bit different. And I mean, even now, it seems that you are appealing more to opinion when you're saying it just feels wrong. I mean, that seems very opinion. And I'm the one that's actually appealing to an objective framework where I'm saying, well, it may be your opinion that it feels wrong, but that opinion is actually aligned with a scientific reason why slavery isn't the best economic system. But I am curious, though, because one of my interests in this topic is when will those intuitions and the scientific reality be out of alignment? Because everywhere I look, I see them in alignment, which is bizarre to me, because like even what you're talking about the sacrifice of Jesus, which I can respect, even as an atheist, I can respect as, this is a powerful, motivating story. And it just so happens that what it motivates is what makes modern civilization possible. There's a perfect alignment there. And I guess where it is out of alignment is cases that you're talking about, like the Taliban, where there's this huge economic resource that they are throwing away, that their morality, which feels right to them, but I think scientifically is incorrect, is holding them back in a sense. I mean, it's difficult when you're talking about Islam, because Islam, I make a distinction many times when I talk about these topics between an honor culture and a dignity culture. Christian, Protestant culture, democratic Western culture tends to be a dignity culture, which is much different than an honor culture. Although, like back in slavery, our slavery days in the United States, we very much were an honor culture. So there's a distinction there. But go ahead. You want to make a comment?
I think it's easy to hear the Christian making the moral realist argument as though we just feel very strongly that people should be equal, slaves should be free, all that kind of stuff. But I think the argument is more that there is a realm of naturalistic truth that is accessible to empirical study. There is also, and the materialists can agree to this as well, there is sort of maths and logic. There are metaphysical truths like that, and they are studied in a different way to the scientific truths. So yes, that the Earth is so far from the sun is you measure that in an empirical way, but the law of non-contradiction in logic is not accessed in our minds in the same way as you don't do a scientific study. You don't put maths under the microscope. You study logic and maths and those kind of metaphysical realities in a different way. And I'm just saying, so there are these mechanistic truths that you study in this kind of way. There are these metaphysical truths that you study in a certain way, and there are moral truths that you study in a certain way, and there are aesthetic realities that we study in a certain way. And there's this conceptuality of consciousness that I don't think kind of fits into any of those kind of pots, as it were. And so I think Christians are heard to be saying, I like my morality very much, because if the only two ways of studying the world are through logical claims and scientific claims, then anything outside of that just sounds like you got the feels. So Glenn's got a warm fuzzy about equality. Big whoop. That's not a real thing. And I think my claim is more that there are different domains that are studied in different ways, and morality exists in this other space. And actually, I kind of think that the way that is it Eric or Brett Weinstein who talks about metaphorical truths?
Brett,
one of those guys. Anyway, in terms of there are truths that he would say are literally false, but if you act as though they were true, you come out ahead of where you would otherwise. I wonder whether metaphorical truth is, in my language, metaphorical truth is, I think he's talking about a moral realm. And when he says, and it's not like this mathematical stuff, and it's not like this scientific stuff, it's this other thing that actually means we come out ahead of where we would be. Isn't that weird? And I kind of, as a Christian, go, we've been talking about this for thousands of years. And maybe God's ways work in God's world because it's God's world. But maybe that thing is not, it's not like the Diet Coke version of the scientific truth. Maybe it's this other thing that needs to be accessed and thought about in a different kind of way. That's where I'm at the moment.
Yeah, the metaphorical truth concept I've done tons of videos on. I'm very acquainted with. I totally agree with you that you're definitely talking about the moral space when you're talking about metaphorical truth. So, but the metaphorical truth definitely overlaps with the Darwinian perspective. So, I think we've actually talked for almost an hour. I feel like I'm grilling you a little more than I intended to. Which is funny because I'm almost defending Haidt Meta here, who is someone that I generally don't like defending, because it bugs me that the career atheists bug me because they're not really acquainted with the actual science that's going on in this space, and yet they're standing under the banner of science claiming to be these empirical people. So, but do you have questions for me? You've got a live atheist here.
It's my job to convert you.
I feel like you had questions that you wanted to really grill Haidt on, and one of my thinkings of doing this was like, okay, he can grill me on these questions, and I'll actually have answers for him.
Okay.
You have a friend. Sorry to interrupt. You have a friend that is on your YouTube channel too, though.
Yeah,
Paul. So, do you guys do all that? Do you do everything together? Is he a preacher as well, or?
Yeah, he is, and he joined Speak Life about a year ago, and we make a whole bunch of videos together. And he's great. He couldn't be around tonight, but I think I don't know what my question would be for you, but I guess the first time I came across Cosmic Skeptic was a video he did about Sam Harris, and how Sam Harris is trying to, with the moral landscape, be a moral realist, and we can't be that. As an atheist, you're saying, we cannot be moral realists. And he got into the question of the Holocaust and Nazism, and he kind of makes this point at one point where he says, I would hope that even though the Holocaust is not wrong, but it is an irrational way of ordering your society. And he was saying, I would hope that I could sit down with the Nazi and show him that society is not best ordered in this way. This is not the best thing for human flourishing. And I hope that I could win him through rationality towards a more, healthy and flourishing society. And I guess to him, I would want to ask, so now you can be a proxy for Alex O'Connor rather than Haidt Meta. But for him, I would kind of want to ask, is that really what we're doing in moral arguments? Are we really in moral arguments basically doing a cost-benefit analysis? Aren't we ignoring an entire category that the human person resonates with and responds to, that is whether something is right or not, and that actually to discuss whether something is beneficial is just a completely different question. And my great fear with materialism as a whole is that if all you've got is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. You know what I mean? Like if all you've got is Darwinian evolution as an explanation for all things, you're going to want to be able to answer every question in the same sorts of ways. And I don't see why the Nazi couldn't come back to Alex O'Connor and convince Alex O'Connor of the reverse, that Alex O'Connor might start to agree with the Nazi. They are on equal footing.
Are you saying that the materialist perspective takes the magic out of it? It sounds a little bit like you're saying that.
Well, but I think and that's the perspective that a materialist must see, because if everything is matter and motion, then anything that is not in that frame must appear magic.
What?
And I'm just saying there are all sorts of other M's that aren't magic. There's minds, there are metaphysics, there's morals, there's music, there's mercy, there are miracles, there are all sorts of things that are part of our daily experience that aren't magic, so to speak, but are part of the reality that we all access. And therefore, if we're constantly boiling all things down to matter and motion, we're just going to be reductionistic.
So the reductionistic aspect of it bothers you. taking complexity out. I'm not a fan of parsimony. I think things should be as simple as they can be, but like morality, you're talking about something that's so complex. I don't think reductionist views on morality are helpful. I don't want to throw any shade at Cosmic Skeptic, because while I am currently of the opinion Cosmic Skeptic doesn't get it, like I just don't think he's well read enough to understand the perspective that I'm coming to. And it doesn't necessarily mean that my perspective is better. It just means that they differ. Perhaps there's a third perspective out there that is the correct one. But I've watched a debate between Cosmic Skeptic and Michael of Inspiring Philosophy, and it very much frustrated me because neither one of them really got it as far as the materialist perspective, in that morality is all about uniting individuals into teams. Once you understand that very evolution 101 statement, it's so profound that a lot of the things that you say make a lot more sense. So the cost benefit thing is what nature is doing. The Nazi argument that you're making, and this is Jordan Peterson all the way. When Jordan Peterson talks about Darwinian truth, he's talking about the Darwinian framework is constantly adjudicating the truth value of moral statements, because the people that make those truth claims survive or annihilated from history based on the validity of those truth claims. Now, from where I sit, the Nazis lost the war, and their truth claims have been proven incorrect. So materialistically, we can very much say that where that moral framework leads is no more Nazis. So I don't have any problem saying that they're incorrect, that they're wrong, that they lost. Guess who lost the war, buddy?
But only because they lost. So if they had have won,
yes, and you want to play this game too, which is what if they won the war? Well, what if horses evolved wings and could fly around like Pegasuses? Like there is the real world that sooner or later we have to contend with. So I would make the argument that they couldn't possibly win the war because their moral framework was untrue, was incorrect. Nature adjudicated that. It did. I would argue that if another Nazi regime came to rise, it would play out exactly the same way, because the Darwinian framework is always out there adjudicating truth. And the way that it adjudicates truth is, think a bit about it. If the Nazis did rise up again, what would happen? The world would beat them down. I'm pretty certain of it. Like, we've made war illegal. War is illegal now. Yeah.
Thanks largely to a guy who showed up in the middle of history and said, "Put away your sword, and those who live by the sword will die by the sword."
I'm not disagreeing with you. I am not disagreeing with you. Even if there's not a lick of scientific truth to it, there is a whole bunch of metaphorical truth to it. This is the reigning champion moral system right now for a reason. For a very tangible, materialistic reason. And it's one of the reasons why I go round and round with the anti-theists, because the anti-theists are on the march to destroy the best morality nature has ever created. And it baffles me. You have to throw science away to take the position that they've taken. And the fact that they're standing under the banner of science at the same time they're throwing science away, it's just, the irony is too rich for me to not speak about.
Yeah. What do you do then with, a lot of Jesus' teachings, Sermon on the Mount. So go to Jesus 101, Sermon on the Mount, Matthew's Gospel, chapters 5 to 7. This is the stuff that everybody knows about Jesus' teaching. And yet it sounds nuts in terms of turn the other cheek, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. If someone sues you for your coat, give them the shirt off your back. if they force you to walk a mile, go the extra mile. Walk another mile with the guy who's forced you to do that. That seems radically counter Darwinian.
It's not, though. There's this great book called Beyond Revenge, and it's very difficult to. Our instinct is very Old Testament. Our instinct is get even, right? An eye for an eye, I believe, is what Moses said. So,
yeah.
But
and
that
Jesus commented in the Sermon on the Mount, yeah.
But that instinct is not good for society, because you bound up a lot of your human resources in tit for tat struggles that are unending. So they've done tests with this in game theory. There's a game that they did with computer models. The world champion computer model is something called generous tit for tat, which is basically a mathematical algorithm that copies the Sermon on the Mount, turn the other cheek, because you not only can your morality embody this reciprocal altruism arrangement, but mistakes can happen. People can accidentally wrong you. And if you don't have this forgiveness component, then those mistakes end up turning into they end up in this
cycles of violence.
Yeah, exactly. Cycles of violence that can be vicious cycles that can actually end up taking societies down. So there's the book Beyond Revenge. I can't remember the author, but yeah, there is a lot. One of the reasons why I've come to this perspective is because I read so much of the scientific stuff. And my Christian upbringing, I keep thinking, okay, well, this is the Jesus story encapsulates this very unintuitive thinking, but it is Darwinian to the core. One of the reasons why I think Jordan Peterson is so popular is because he is articulating a lot of these ideas, and it's giving people who have for a long time seen religion in a negative light, it's giving them rational reasons to see Christianity in more of a positive light. And I don't know that that's a bad thing. I really don't. Even though, so what is your take on that? Because it does take a little of the magic out. I'm willing to admit it, but
I don't think so. I think I meet people all around the country. I live in the UK. I'm from Australia originally, but I live in the UK, and I go to different churches around England. And just last week, I was up right north in the north of England, Newcastle, and I met another few guys who they just started in conversation. I gave a talk, and there was this guy who was really responding to what I was saying, and he started, talking about, I need to take more responsibility for my life and clean up my room. And I was like, have you been listening to Jordan Peterson? And he sort of did this kind of looking at the both.
Is it okay here?
Yeah. And everywhere I go, it's the same. Everywhere I go. And, I follow a guy on YouTube, Paul Vanderklay, who I think you've done a video with
yeah,
Paul.
I did a talk with him. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's posting up videos almost every week with guys who would say that Jordan Peterson is a gateway drug into Christianity. And I see all sorts of people leapfrogging Jordan Peterson into the kingdom. They are seeing the wisdom of the Bible and getting interested and getting hooked. So I think that is all to the good. I kind of see Jordan Peterson as like Moses. He's the law. He's
awesome.
20% better than Moses. He's got 12 rules, not just 10. And I see people responding to that, and it's wisdom. And when he drops lines from the Sermon on the Mount into 12 rules for life, they land with a weight. And I think people are really responding to that. I think why I kind of relate him to Moses is because he is the law, but I do think we need something more than law. I do think we need forgiveness for when we stuff up. We need we need that grace for when we don't tidy up our rooms and when we don't stand up straight with our shoulders back I do think you need to supplement Jordan Peterson with Christ not only as the goal who will judge you, but Christ as the savior who actually reaches down into the pit to pick you up. So I've loved Peterson. I just think he needs there needs to be something more in terms of the Jesus that he has. Really, the Jesus he has is pure example, whereas I think in the Bible the Jesus there is example, but even more importantly, savior. I think that's
Would you say that your congregation is more conservative or more progressive? The English terms because here liberal is progressive, so. Yeah.
So, England's very different to in the States. So in England, I'm very happy to say I'm an evangelical because it does not mean a voting bloc. In England, it emphatically does not mean a voting bloc. The people in my church will, the last guy I met with from my church yesterday, he's a member of the Green Party, a real environmentalist. Another guy I was up on the train with just yesterday, he's a conservative, is a Tory.
So politics is really taken out of the congregation there.
Totally.
That's good. That's good.
Cannot predict how a person will vote in the UK, depending on their faith. It's just, I don't know how they're going to vote on Brexit or Remain. I don't know how they're going to vote on which party they vote for. So, having said that, I'd say we're on the more conservative end in terms of we spend a lot of time in the Bible, and I'd say probably ethically and morally we're conservative in terms of we believe in traditional marriage, even though we're incredibly inclusive in terms of, hey, anyone can come and sit and let's talk this stuff through. But we kind of think the Bible says this about marriage. So on certain depending on what your frame of reference is, we might seem liberal, we might seem conservative, but I don't know.
So, do you have any more questions before we wrap up? I think
I'm good.
Was my Nazi answer acceptable? Which one?
Yeah, it doesn't conflict with my answer in terms of, because you seem to have a great confidence that the Nazis wouldn't win, that there's a madness to it that would be self-destructive, and that's I do. I don't that alternative history that people constantly throw out where the Nazis win the war. I'm like, that's like the alternative history where the meteor didn't strike the earth and the dinosaurs didn't die. It's like, but does it not then? So the fact that we've evolved to have 5 fingers and not 6, that's a different order of contingency to we've evolved to think that rape is wrong. Would you say that seems like a different category of discussion to me, that there are kind of contingent things to where we've discovered ourselves to be, evolutionarily speaking, but when it comes to things like, is rape wrong, it seems like we're talking about different things. Is that just an illusion?
Rape foments conflict within the group, and a lot of people throw the rape thing out and they say, well, rape is evolutionarily adaptive. No, it's not. If you live in a tribe where the biggest guys are going to come and cut your head off if you rape anyone, that's unless you're arguing that taking your genes out of the gene pools is adaptive, then you're very wrong about rape being adaptive. Like, even in prison, the most naturalistic society you can get, the rapists get rapists and pedophiles, they get taken care of. We have an instinct that rape is bad for, human beings have this competitive nature as far as reproductive fitness goes, that we're competing on a level, not a kind of a moral playing field, I would say.
Yeah. But that's within our species. Within every other species, there are things that we would call rape if they happen in society.
We are the moral animal, though. I mean, morality is an adaptation that humans have that I don't think you can superimpose onto animals. Animals are just root behavior. Like, when we developed language and the ability to communicate, Like even the whites of our eyes are evolved to facilitate cooperation. Like chimpanzees, you can't tell where they're looking. Human beings, you can tell where they're looking because that is a huge competitive advantage for a team. Just to be able to look across just to be able to look across the field and to see where someone is looking is a competitive advantage in team hunting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And, none of that conflicts with what I believe, because another way of saying that from my perspective would be this is God's world in which, there is a grain to the moral universe, and you can go against the grain, and it's much better if you go with the grain. So no wonder certain practices succeed and certain practices fail. I don't see these two explanations as in conflict with one another at all. Just return to my
the problem of authority, I think, is the point of contention. I really do. This idea because God is the most effective path towards presenting an authority behind your morality. But I mean, we have like fiat currency. We have all these institutions that are basically built on the same kind of belief system. I mean, the fact that we walk around with paper in our wallets and believe that it's worth something is another sort of belief system. But the authority of that currency is bestowed by our belief that the state is some kind of almost godlike omnipotent power, that state is going to always be there. I mean, it shares a lot of the same attributes as God. So, I mean, I think the concept of God is very useful. And I mean, it's very interesting that Peterson says, I act as though God exists. Like, he doesn't want to say, for all intents and purposes, he could be an atheist, but I do understand that. And inspiring philosophy has used some studies that I've actually read myself that you don't get this health benefit unless you actually believe in God. Like if I decided, okay, I'm going to believe in God, but I don't really believe, you don't necessarily get the advantages. And I'm too far lost. I don't know if I could actually
say that.
I don't know if I could actually believing in God seems, if we're living in this is going to sound horrible because it's a simulation thing. Like if we're living in a simulation, then okay, there is a God, and I am terrified of that God because, like, please don't switch the computer off.
Okay, yeah. But I mean, okay, so showing up in evolutionary history is this worldview that is founded on the kind of God who would come, stoop, serve, suffer, bleed, and die for you, who would turn the cheek to you, even though you want rid of him, and he turns the other cheek to you. He rises up again, and he says, do you want me? To me, that's the kind of God that I could believe in.
Yeah, perfect.
But so that's my question to Peterson. Like, if I had a chance to ask him one question, it would be: you say you act as though God exists, but the God you spend a lot of your time talking about is the Christian God and the God of the Bible. But the way to act correctly before that God is not simply to be an ethical individual. It is to be involved in a community of faith, a community of where we orient ourselves according to this highest ideal, and we go through these motions of enacting the story. There's ritual, there's liturgy, there's sacraments, there's taking the bread and the wine, and there's supporting one another through things. And so I guess my thing for Peterson would be, like, if you want to act as though it's true, it's not just to be an ethical individual. Maybe go to church, and there are those health benefits to it. And I kind of, I see in my everyday life that there are people who have taken the Peterson red pill. They've gone down the rabbit hole. They have put themselves in the way of the Bible, and they've lived into the story in community, and they've started to find themselves believing. And I just, I wonder whether that could be true for Peterson, could be true for you. I don't know.
I think it could. We have a natural inclination to accept the beliefs of the people around us. And you see this in political views as well. I mean, there's all kinds of political views that aren't founded on any kind of empirical evidence. But as soon as everyone is believing it, you kind of socially go along with believing it. So I don't know, because I haven't been in a church, but I'm curious about that. I'm very fascinated. Me being a diehard materialist, I would blame it on human psychology, but
I wouldn't say that as in competition with, well, maybe the human psychology is like this, and maybe the Darwinian frame is like this because there is a kind of a moral being behind it all. So you'd be welcome at my church anytime, Adam.
People. Jordan Peterson is like the best avatar for this, because he is a clinical psychologist and he's been working with people with problems. This is why I think he had such an advantage over Sam Harris in the debates. And he has an advantage over most of the anti-theists because they've never really dealt with the people with real problems.
Right.
And religion, I'm sure you deal with those people all the time. Like, religion is helpful with those problems. You're embedding yourself in a community that is going to help you at least psychologically, get your act together. It's tremendously helpful. So he sees the benefit of religion that a lot of people that frown on religion only see the bad, which, so I think you really have to do. It comes back to a cost benefit analysis again. So, but let's wrap up here. I've talked to you. You've been very generous with your time, and I know that you were going to get to bed. Give us your channel one more time. It's Speak Life, and it's you.
Yeah, if you search for Speak Life UK, that'll probably get you there quickest. There's a whole bunch of Speak Life channels, but we are Speak Life UK. And we've got a bunch of Peterson videos. We've got a bunch of videos. We've got 2 videos on Haidt Meta, and I think you'd really like the one we did before the one you've seen, because we go into the Jonathan Haidt stuff a little bit, and you might like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I'll also link to it in the description below. Thank you. You've been so generous with your time, and this has been a great conversation. So let us both know in the comments below what you thought. If you have any ideas about what we're talking about, this obviously it's the Think Club. We want to think about these ideas and try to move the conversation forward. So take care, everyone.
Well, first of all, if you don't have a purpose, it isn't that your life becomes neutral in a meaningless sense. It's that your life becomes characterized by unbearable suffering. Because the baseline condition of life is something like unbearable suffering.